They used to call us the family that fed a city. Elegant, wasn't it? Grand. Like something embroidered onto silk napkins or etched in gold leaf across the arch of our corporate headquarters. And maybe, on the surface, it wasn't a lie. My family built a logistics empire, coastal depots, air freight hubs, trucking lines that webbed across the country like arteries. We didn't just move cargo, we moved economies. And I was born into that story, wrapped in it like velvet. They called me the heir from the moment I took my first step on the marble floors of our estate. Even when I was still learning how to walk, my grandfather would point to the company crest above the fireplace and say, "Someday, it'll be your initials on the front gate." Sounds flattering, doesn't it? It wasn't. It was branding. Because from the moment I could speak clearly, I stopped being a daughter or a granddaughter. I became an asset, a legacy in the making. And make no mistake, legacy in a family like mine doesn't mean love. It means loyalty. Absolute, unquestioned. I wasn't raised, I was trained. Poise classes at 6, etiquette by 8, business theory by 11. My weekends weren't filled with cartoons and chaos. They were filled with shareholders' brunches, legal briefings, and quiet warnings to smile more or speak less. "Don't embarrass the family," my father would say with a stare so cold it could crack glass. "You're not just anyone. You're ours." I hated that word, ours, like I was property, a thing. A crown they could polish when guests arrived, then lock in a drawer when it spoke out of turn. It's strange how easily people mistake structure for safety. From the outside, my life looked charmed. Private school with black tie galas, summers in Saint-Tropez, birthday parties where senators and CEOs sent monogrammed gifts. I had access. I had power. But what I didn't have was choice. Every ambition I expressed that wasn't part of the Sloan blueprint was met with polite laughter, dismissive smiles, the kind of condescension so refined it took me years to realize it was actually cruelty. At 18, I told my father I wanted to study environmental law. He leaned back in his leather chair, took a sip of his bourbon, and said, "Save the world on your own time, darling. You've got a kingdom to inherit." I remember walking out of that room, heels clicking on the marble, feeling like each step was a betrayal to myself, but also knowing there was nowhere else to walk to. I was trapped. Not in chains, no. My prison had chandeliers, chauffeurs, custom tailoring, but it was still a cage. One built by legacy, one guarded by family, one that was never meant to be escaped. And yet, even back then, in those golden halls and shadowed corners, I felt the first cracks form, quiet rebellions. They began as whispers in my own mind. What if I said no? What if I walked away? What if this isn't my throne after all? But I buried them, because daughters don't disappoint. Heirs don't decline. And in the Sloan household, defiance was the only unforgivable sin. So I stayed. I smiled at galas. I toasted at ribbon cuttings. I gave speeches about legacy and innovation while secretly wondering how it would feel to lose it all just to finally breathe. They mistook my silence for agreement, my obedience for loyalty. But I was neither loyal nor obedient. I was patient, and patience, I would come to learn, is the deadliest tool of all. The offer came wrapped in velvet and power. Graduation day was supposed to be about tassels and champagne. Instead, it came with a contract, literal and emotional. My father stood under the ivy-covered archway of the Sloan family estate, champagne flute in hand, lips curled into what he must have thought was a smile. He waited for the guest to fade out of earshot before stepping closer. "I've had legal draw up the succession schedule," he said, like he was offering me dessert. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't ask about my speech or the diploma I'd spent 4 years clawing through sleepless nights for. Number. He handed me a manila envelope. That was my reward. Inside were documents with my name on them, Sloan Enterprises, slated to transfer majority control to me within 6 months. 6 months of shadowing him in meetings, sitting in on audits, doing the dance I'd watched my whole life. And then, the crown. Just like he promised. Just like he'd always planned. Just like I never wanted. I stared at the papers, fingers tracing the raised embossing of the company logo like it might cut me. My mind went back to sleepless nights spent poring over books on environmental justice, debates I led, internships I'd fought for. None of it had ever been about balance sheets or acquisitions. I didn't want to inherit his empire. I wanted to matter in my own way. And for the first time in my life, I said it. No. He blinked. Just once. It wasn't a surprised blink. It was something colder, calculated, like he was already imagining how he'd spin my disobedience at the next board dinner. "Excuse me," he said, voice flat. "I don't want it," I said again. "The business, the title, the chain." He took a long sip of champagne before answering. "You're confused." "I'm not. You're young. I'm qualified, and I still don't want it. You're ungrateful." There it was, the accusation, the slap without contact, his favorite weapon. I took a breath, grounding myself. I'm allowed to want something else. "No," he said, voice low, sharp, like flint to steel. "You're not. You're a Sloan. You don't want. You continue. You build. You lead." "I will lead," I said, the fire rising in me now. "But not like this. Not under your conditions. Not with your name in every breath I take." The glass in his hand didn't break, but I could hear the tension in his grip. His silence was nuclear. For a second, I thought he might laugh, or rage, or dismiss me with a shrug. But what he did was worse. He smiled, not a warm smile. The kind of smile a predator gives when the prey steps willingly into the snare. "You'll regret this," he said. "And when you do, you'll come crawling." Not walking, crawling. I didn't flinch, I didn't cry. But I knew in that moment I wasn't just turning down a job. I was turning down him. His approval, his inheritance, his throne. And for someone like my father, that wasn't disobedience. It was treason. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in surgical cuts. Suddenly, I was too busy to include in family events. Business emails that once CC'd me quietly stopped arriving. My birthday party, always a gala, became a silent brunch I wasn't invited to. Cousins whispered. Aunt smiled too tightly. My mother, ever the perfect hostess, said, "Well, darling, you did bring this upon yourself." I hadn't realized saying no to a job would exile me from an entire bloodline, but I'd learn. And as the weeks passed, I stopped being a disappointment in their eyes. I became a threat, because what my father didn't understand, what none of them did, was that saying no to the crown didn't make me weak. It made me free, and I'd rather build something alone with truth than reign beside them with lies. Exile doesn't happen with drums and banishment. Not in families like mine. In families like mine, exile wears silk gloves. It smells like cologne and policy. It begins with subtle omissions and ends with the unmistakable feeling that you're not just outside the circle. You're no longer even on the invitation list. It started small, quiet, almost polite. The monthly family newsletter, usually a glowing catalog of achievements, stopped arriving in my inbox. No warning, no technical glitch. Just gone. Then came the gala for my father's business anniversary. I'd been on the committee since I was 17. But this time, the planning Zooms happened without me. No call, no apology. I only found out it had already happened when I saw the photos online. My brother Derek, center stage, holding up a plaque while my father beamed like he'd just knighted royalty. "Future of Sloan Enterprises," the caption read. That same week, my access card to the family office building was deactivated. I found out when I tried to enter the side lobby to visit an old friend at the in-house law firm. The security guard looked uncomfortable as he scanned the screen and said, "You've been removed from the clearance list." Removed. Just like that. No meeting, no explanation. Like I died and no one told me. The whispers came next. Not to me, of course. No one ever says these things to your face. But friends called to say, "I heard your dad was devastated by your choices." One former classmate mentioned a rumor that I was having a quarter-life crisis. An ex-boyfriend emailed to ask if I was really off the rails or just reinventing myself. And my brother, he played the dutiful son perfectly. He started attending board meetings, flying first class to conferences in cities I used to keynote in. I watched from afar as my name was erased from the narrative, digitally and socially. I wasn't even part of the family group photo anymore. They used an older one, cropped tight, just enough to imply I'd never been there. Isolation, I learned, has many shades. It wasn't just loneliness, it was extraction, a precise removal of identity from memory. I tried calling my father once, straight to voicemail. My mother texted 3 days later, "He's busy and disappointed. Please understand." Please understand. I understood, all right? I understood that to them, love had always been conditional, that my worth was measured by obedience, that refusing the crown made me dangerous, not because I failed, but because I chose not to play their game. I packed up the last of my things that weekend. The apartment they'd given me downtown, fully furnished, complete with a doorman who knew my name, was no longer mine, not officially. The lease had been under a family trust. I had 90 days to vacate, but I left in 10. There was something sacred about leaving before they could force me to. I moved into a shoebox apartment across the river. No valet, no concierge. Just a crooked hallway that smelled like burnt toast and somebody's cat. It was perfect. For the first time in my life, every single thing in that space was mine. The chipped desk, the second-hand espresso machine, the mattress that creaked when I turned. Mine. I got a job as an assistant at a community nonprofit. Low pay, long hours, no title. And yet, I slept better. Because the silence that haunted me in the family mansion became something else in that little flat. It became a canvas. They thought they'd broken me. They thought exile would shrink me. But what they failed to realize is, when you grow up in the shadows of giants, all it takes is one clean exit to finally see the sky. The day I realized I was broke, I was standing in front of a vending machine, arguing with myself over whether to buy trail mix or save the $1.75. I chose not to. That moment, stupid as it sounds, lives in my memory with ridiculous clarity. The humming buzz of fluorescent lights, my reflection in the scratched plastic of the snack machine, the smell of stale floor cleaner from the janitor's cart down the hall. Every detail burned in like it was waiting to be archived. Because that's how rock bottom introduces itself. Not with a bang, but with a whisper you can't ignore anymore. My savings didn't last long. You'd be amazed how fast money disappears when you no longer have the safety net of family credit cards, trust funds, or quiet favors from family friends who owe your father. I sold things, the handbags first, then the jewelry, then the designer shoes I used to pretend I actually liked walking in. Each time I let go of something, it felt a little easier, lighter, until it didn't. Until one morning, I was crouched over a Craigslist ad for a roommate situation with the tagline, "Chill vibes, no creeps," wondering if I could tolerate a shared bathroom just to cut rent in half. That's when I cried. Not because of the poverty. Poverty can be endured. But because I realized I had no one to call. My phone, once a hotline of corporate invites and luxury brunch RSVPs, now sat still most days. No missed calls. No texts. Just spam and app alerts. The family had moved on without me. The friends I thought were mine had all quietly faded into the Sloan-approved version of reality, one that no longer included me. I remember sitting on my twin mattress on the floor, knees to my chest, staring out a rain-streaked window and whispering to no one, "What the hell did I do?" And I almost caved, almost called my mother, almost wrote some apology I didn't mean, almost convinced myself that swallowing my dreams for a seat at their table might be better than eating dollar ramen alone. But then I found the letter. It was tucked in an old journal I hadn't opened since college. Yellowed paper, familiar cursive, My grandmother's handwriting. She'd passed a few years back, quietly, gracefully, the only member of the family who'd ever truly seen me. The letter was addressed to no one. Maybe it wasn't even for me. But it read like she'd written it while thinking of someone who would one day find herself exactly here. There will be a day when everything you were given is taken. When your name, your status, your pride are all stripped. On that day, remember, you were not raised by wealth. You were raised by women who survived wars, who loved recklessly, who chose dignity over comfort. Let them say you were foolish. Let them whisper you failed. But never, never let them say you bowed. I folded the letter carefully, like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. That night I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't eat either, not because I couldn't afford to, but because I was full, with clarity. This wasn't rock bottom, it was foundation, and from there, I would build something no one could take from me again. Not because I had something to prove, but because I finally knew what I deserved. It didn't start with a light bulb moment. There was no movie montage, no divine revelation, just a half-burnt coffee and a job posting that had been emailed to the wrong person. I was scrolling through a temp agency's internal list, access I'd kept even after my short stint as their assistant ended. A data entry job, probably meant for someone else. It was with a boutique logistics firm, small, scrappy, and practically invisible to the world. But something in the description caught my eye. Seeking someone with high attention to detail and discretion. Bonus if you've ever been underestimated. I don't know why that last line gripped me. Maybe because I'd never seen honesty like that in corporate speak. Maybe because it felt like someone behind that post had once stood in my shoes. I applied. Got the job within 2 days. The office was 2 floors above a laundromat and smelled vaguely of toner and ambition. There was no marble, no valet parking, no cappuccino machine, but there were minds, sharp ones. People who didn't care about last names, only results. People who weren't afraid to say, I don't know, let's figure it out, and mean it. They gave me a desk. No title, really. Just a nameplate made of cardboard and a to-do list longer than my rent agreement. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel small. I felt useful. I wasn't just managing calendars or smoothing egos. I was solving problems, broken logistics chains, supplier disputes, client blow-ups. I learned things faster than I had in any classroom. And slowly, I started making suggestions. Quietly at first, then more boldly. Within 3 months, I was offered a permanent role, not in administration, but in operational design. Apparently, I had a knack for streamlining inefficiencies. By month 6, the CEO had me sitting in on strategic meetings. He said I asked better questions than most of his consultants. By year 1, I wasn't just employed, I was influencing. I didn't tell anyone where I came from. I let them think I was just another sharp kid with hustle and a bruised resume. I wore discount suits, carried a $10 tote, and let my work speak louder than my wardrobe ever had. And as my confidence returned, so did the hunger, but not for revenge, not yet. What I craved was identity, something of mine, something no father or brother or dynasty could claim ownership over. And so, late one night, I registered a domain name, Sullen. A nod to the name Sloan, but reshaped, reinvented. My name evolved, a brand I could build from scratch. I didn't even know what it would become. Consulting, strategy, logistics, maybe all of it. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I owned it. The first investment was small, just a website, a few case studies, and a single client I met through a friend of a friend who needed help scaling her online business. But that one client turned into 2 into 6. By year 2, I had a small team of freelancers, a network of vendors, and enough recurring revenue to quit my day job. I rented an office, modest but beautiful, brick walls, big windows, a view of the city that didn't belong to anyone but me. And it was then, standing in that empty office with a plant in one hand and a laptop in the other, that I realized I hadn't just survived exile, I'd transformed it. This wasn't a comeback. It was the beginning of a new kingdom, and they had no idea what was coming. I hadn't seen most of them in years, not since the headlines, not since the holidays went quiet and the birthday texts stopped, not since my name became the silent ghost they passed over at dinner tables. But when a patriarch dies, the family shows up, even the exiled ones. The invitation arrived in the form of a stiff white envelope, hand-delivered to my office. No return address, no note, just a gold-stamped seal from the family attorney. The will reading would take place at the estate, naturally. I debated not going. Why give them the satisfaction of seeing me walk back through those columns like a shadow they thought they buried? But I did go, not for him, not even for closure. I went because I wanted to watch their faces when I walked in. Not broken, not bitter, but transformed. I wore a navy suit, sleek, understated. Nothing about me screamed money, but everything about me whispered control. The drawing room hadn't changed. The grandfather clock still ticked like a metronome for the family's carefully orchestrated drama. The oil paintings still watched like disapproving ancestors, and the air still heavy with the scent of antique wood and unspoken things. They were all there, my father's second wife, clutching her pearls like they were prayer beads. The golden sibling, smug as ever, already leaning into his inheritance like it was a birthright. A few aunts and uncles I barely recognized, their faces pulled tight with curiosity and something less polite. The attorney, Mr. Halberd, same stooped back and humorless voice, began reading. It was all very formal. To so-and-so, this estate. To such and such, those stocks. To the beloved son, the company. And then, to my daughter, though she has chosen a path separate from this family's legacy, I leave my books. My books. Not shares, not property, not even a damn painting. His library, which, in fairness, did hold first editions of Twain, Hemingway, and Baldwin. But that wasn't the point. It was a message, loud and clear. She chose her own way, so she gets stories. They smirked, every single one of them, even the cousin who once cried on my shoulder after flunking out of prep school. I didn't flinch. I stood, smiled. Fitting, I said softly. Words built this empire long before the money ever did. Maybe I'll learn something. And I left. Didn't wait for the toast. Didn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. I stepped out of that mausoleum of legacy with my heels sharp against the marble and my mind already working. Because here's the thing about being written out of a will. It frees you. No crumbs, no clauses, no strings. They thought they'd closed the book on me, but what they didn't realize was I'd just been handed the title page, and I was about to write the story they'd never see coming. They didn't see me coming, not at first. That was the point. You see, when someone rises from the ashes in public, the spectacle gives your enemies time to regroup. But when you rise in silence, when you move like smoke, by the time they smell the fire, the foundation is already gone. I didn't make a grand entrance back into town. I leased a loft quietly under an LLC I'd registered years ago for a shell project. I bought a car, modest, sleek, nothing flashy, and I started showing up at the cafe near the courthouse where all the old money interns flirted with ambition. At the charity auction where my father once donated a yacht and I donated a painting under the name M. Sullen. At the private gala where I paid for an entire scholarship program in cash, anonymously, until the final moment, when they read the benefactor's name aloud and every champagne flute froze halfway to a lip. Sullen. Whispers followed. Some pretended not to recognize me. Others didn't even try to hide their shock. My brother's wife came up to me, fake tears welling up behind her too tight facelift. "Oh my God," she said. "You look powerful." And I did. years away from the dynasty, had carved off the need for their approval. I no longer needed to be the favored daughter or the quiet genius. I was simply me, sharpened by exile, emboldened by clarity. And while they played dress-up and titles and old clout, I built leverage. I bought the florist shop that supplied the estate's annual garden gala. I acquired the bakery that catered their Sunday brunches. I invested in the wine distributor that stocked their cellars. Quietly, strategically. No one paid attention to who signed the checks. The family never did like to look beneath them. But that's where I live now, in the undercurrent. The invisible hand with a scalpel instead of a sword. Every time they toasted another year of legacy, they were sipping from my reserves. And just when I thought I'd reached my peak of satisfaction, I found something unexpected. A letter slipped beneath my office door. No envelope, just folded once. My name printed in ink I recognized instantly. My father's handwriting. The letter was undated. Maybe written months before his death, maybe years. It wasn't dramatic. There were no apologies, just reflections. Hesitations caught between pride and regret. He said he never understood why I turned away from the business, but part of him respected it. He admitted that my refusal shook him, made him doubt the values he spent decades forcing onto others. And in the final paragraph, he wrote, "You didn't betray the family. You just refused to become its prisoner. I hope you know." Part of me envied you for that. I folded the letter and placed it in a silver frame on my bookshelf, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. Sometimes the throne you walk away from is the one that crowns you in truth. I didn't return to reclaim what was mine. I came back to prove I never needed it in the first place. And now, the people who had erased me were dining on my empire, bite by bite, without ever tasting the poison and the privilege. They'd soon learn, and I'd be right here, watching, not from the shadows, from the penthouse. It started with a gala, not just any gala, a spectacle, hosted at the historic Ridgemont Hall, an estate so entwined with old family prestige, it practically bled inheritance. It was the centennial fundraiser for the Children's Literacy League, one of those elite events where donors didn't wear name tags, because everyone who mattered already knew each other's names. Except, this time, they didn't know mine. Not yet. The planning committee whispered for weeks about the anonymous benefactor footing the entire bill. $100,000 donation up front, custom decor, 5-star catering, a string quartet flown in from Vienna. No one could confirm the source. All they had was a name, Aurum Holdings. The rumor mill spun fast. Was it a tech mogul? A bored socialite? A bored tech mogul married to a socialite? No one guessed me. I arrived late, on purpose. I wore a black silk gown, minimal jewelry, and a single gold pin on my shoulder. The same crest my father used on every corporate plaque, a message hidden in plain sight. Eyes followed me the moment I walked in, not out of recognition, out of dissonance. I looked like someone they should know, someone from somewhere. I made rounds, shook hands, smiled. I could see the flickers behind their eyes. Is that? No, it can't be. And then came the moment. The auctioneer stepped onto the podium and cleared his throat. Before we begin tonight's bidding, we would like to thank our primary sponsor, whose generosity made this evening possible. She has asked to remain behind the curtain until now. Gasps, murmurs. Champagne stalled mid-sip. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please welcome back to the community, Miss Sloane." Silence. Then a snap, glass breaking in someone's hand. And then faces, turning, staring, processing. My brother turned pale. His wife's jaw unhinged just enough to reveal the raw disbelief they didn't have time to fake. I stepped forward with calm, deliberate grace, took the mic, looked around the room like I owned it, because I did. "I was told this community no longer had a place for me," I said, voice smooth as velvet and twice as cutting. "So I made one of my own." A pause. And now I return, not with a handout, but with a legacy of my own making. Applause came slow, then stronger, some genuine, some desperate attempts to realign with the tide, because nothing terrifies these people more than being on the wrong side of a comeback. After the event, a dozen invitations flooded in. Want to grab lunch, join our board, speak at the alumni banquet? Even the town mayor wanted to reconnect. I ignored them all, because this was never about acceptance. It was about arrival. My name, once erased, now lit up social feeds and funder bulletins. Every corner of the world I'd been locked out of, now knocking, and my brother, the golden child, the chosen heir. He went quiet. That night, I drove home through winding hills and city lights, parked at my quiet, minimalist estate. And for the first time in years, I sat still, not planning, not working, not surviving, just breathing. Because they finally knew, not just that I'd come back, but that I never left the game. I rebuilt it. And now, they were playing on my board. It was tucked inside a hollowed-out law book in my father's study. Not one of the grand tomes that lined the glass display cases in his office. Those were for show. No, this one was dog-eared and dusty. The practice of corporate succession. Irony has a sharp tongue, doesn't it? I wasn't looking for keepsakes. I didn't come back for sentiment. The estate executor had simply informed me there were still documents bearing my name stored in the Solon archives. And legally, I had a right to collect them. The study smelled the same: cologne, leather, and the faint stale musk of ambition left too long in one room. I found it when I dropped the book. It thudded, flopped open, and there it was. An envelope, no seal, yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was unmistakable. To my daughter, unsent. My hands didn't tremble. They froze. For years, I had trained myself to expect nothing from him. Not remorse, not warmth, definitely not explanation. But here it was, folded and hidden like a confession too dangerous to ever be spoken. I sat in his old chair, the one I'd never been allowed to sit in as a child, and read. I've rewritten this letter a dozen times. Each time, the anger bled through, and each time, I burned it. You didn't betray me by refusing the business, but you did scare me. You scared me because you walked away from something I spent my life chasing. And deep down, I feared that meant you saw something I didn't, that maybe I built an empire on sacrifice you weren't willing to make. I called it loyalty, but maybe it was fear disguised as duty. I resented your freedom because I never had it. And maybe in cutting you out, I thought I was punishing your disobedience. But really, I was punishing myself for never having your courage. I hope you build something better. I hope one day, when your name is spoken, it won't be as an heir, but as a creator. I hope you forgive me. I didn't cry. Tears are for surprises. This felt like confirmation. Like the final missing puzzle piece I didn't know I needed. Not to understand him, but to understand myself. He had seen me. Underneath all the fury, the silence, the exile, he had seen me. And even if pride strangled his tongue in life, truth had found a voice in death. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my bag. Not for nostalgia. For protection, it was proof. Not for a courtroom. For the soul. That night, I lit a fire in my own hearth. No lawyers, no press, no empire. Just me and the warmth I had built from scratch. And as the flames danced, I whispered, "You were wrong, Dad. I wasn't born to inherit the empire. I was born to surpass it." The first thing I did was change the name, not out of bitterness, but clarity. The Sloan name came with too many ghosts, too many dinner parties where silence was currency and emotion was an unspoken tax. It was never mine, not really. It belonged to the myths men told about themselves to feel immortal. So I started from zero. No press release, no legal battle, no grand ceremony. I walked into the county clerk's office with no entourage, no designer heels, just me, Marina, and a single sheet of paper. The name I chose, Verity Estelle. Verity for truth. Estelle, my grandmother's middle name, the only woman in our family who dared to dream aloud. It felt like both a rebellion and a homecoming. From there, it moved fast. I launched the Estelle Foundation quietly, funded by the anonymous investments I'd built during my exile, and fueled by one purpose: to shatter the cycle that shaped me. We funded scholarships, not for legacies or trust fund kids, but for girls who were told their voice didn't matter. We created startup incubators, legal defense grants, whistleblower protections. Our board was built of names the old guard would have laughed at, until they read the bios and saw the balance sheets. And behind the scenes, I quietly acquired controlling shares in the very industries my father used to dominate: real estate, media, shipping, technology. But I didn't lead like him. I didn't build fortresses, I built bridges. I made my boardrooms loud with dissent, diverse with thought, and rich in values that couldn't be sold off. And here's the twist: I never tried to erase the past. Instead, I reframed it. I took the old Sloan building, the one with the towering portraits of my father and his ancestors, and turned it into the Verity Institute, a leadership academy, female-run, fully funded, built not to echo old money, but to incubate new power. And in the main lobby, I hung a single photo: me in a simple suit, standing, no throne, no crown, just presence, with a quote etched below: "Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you refuse to pass on." Some days, I wondered what my father would think if he saw it. Would he scoff? Would he finally nod? But I've stopped asking questions of ghosts. They had their era. Now it's mine. I hadn't seen Julian since the will was read. He'd kept his distance, likely under the illusion that time would clean the mess he helped make. That if he stayed shiny enough, polished enough, the stain of betrayal would eventually fade into necessary decisions. But money doesn't launder the soul. And some debts wait quietly, sharpening their edges. The confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom or a dramatic holiday gathering. It happened in the place where power hides best: the fundraising gala. He was the keynote speaker at the Sloan Foundation's annual endowment dinner, an event my father once regarded as the spiritual mass of our family's legacy. Legacy, of course, being a euphemism for self-worship. I hadn't attended in years. But this year, I bought the venue. I didn't announce myself. I walked in, draped in midnight velvet, no entourage, no press badge, just Marina at my side and my invitation engraved with a name Julian had never learned to pronounce: Verity Estelle. He was already mid-speech when I entered, talking about stewardship, tradition, the weight of expectation. Lines so smooth I could almost taste the consultants who had coached him. He looked good, good enough to fool people, but not good enough to fool me. When he saw me, his voice stumbled, just a breath. But it was there, a crack. That was all I needed. I waited until the applause died, until the glasses were lifted and the next donor was escorted to the microphone. Then I made my way to the bar. Positioned where he couldn't avoid me, he approached cautiously. "Verity," he said, trying out the name like it was a foreign coin he wasn't sure was real. "Julian," I answered, giving nothing. He smiled that rehearsed smile, half regret, half self-preservation. "You look powerful." "Because I am." Silence. Then, the sentence I knew he'd eventually say: "I didn't mean for things to go that way." I turned my glass slowly in my hand. "Then why didn't you stop them?" His throat bobbed. "I thought you'd come back. I thought you were just being difficult. You always had something to prove." "And you always had something to hide," I said softly. "You didn't just take what was handed to you. You made sure I couldn't touch it. That's not inheritance. That's theft." He didn't deny it. Cowards rarely do when the walls are too close for comfort. I leaned closer, voice low. "Do you know what hurts, Julian? Not the betrayal. That was inevitable. What hurts is that you thought I couldn't survive it. That you believed the fortune made me. That without it, I'd crumble." He whispered, "I was scared. Of being invisible again." And there it was, the truth. Not power, not legacy, not even greed. Just fear. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of standing next to me and watching the room tilt in my direction every time. Fear that the one thing he thought he earned, being the chosen one, was a costume, and he'd forgotten who he was underneath it. I finished my drink, smiled politely, and walked away. I didn't need vengeance. I was vengeance. And as I left, I heard whispers ripple through the room because they knew, not just who I was, but what I had become. The heir who wasn't chosen, the architect of a new empire, and the living reminder that blood doesn't define legacy, fire does. The Sloane estate hadn't changed, not the wrought iron gates that open like a sigh, not the manicured hedges trimmed within an inch of their existence, not even the family crest, still etched into the marble foyer, still pretending it stood for honor and unity. But I had. I wasn't there to reclaim anything. Not the porcelain dishes, not the leather-bound ledgers, not the ancestral paintings hung like accusations. I came for one room, the mirror room. It was a parlor once, back when people said words like parlor without irony. Then my mother turned it into a gallery of reflections. Antique mirrors from Europe, hand-gilded, arranged from floor to ceiling. 100 versions of your face, a kaleidoscope of who you were and who you pretended to be. When I was a girl, I used to sneak into it late at night, barefoot, silent. I'd stand in the center and spin slowly, watching myself multiply in every direction. It felt magical then. Now, it felt surgical. The housekeeper, Agnes, the last remaining soul who remembered me without judgment, had left the key on the foyer table with a note. For your peace, not theirs. I opened the door. The air inside hadn't moved in years. It was heavy with lemon oil and dust-covered secrets. One by one, I approached each mirror, each frame. Some showed me as I was, poised, polished, unbothered. Others lied, or maybe they told the truth too loud. They showed the girl with the pleated skirts and the shrinking voice, the one who tried to please, to be enough, to be chosen. There were mirrors I couldn't look into at all, the ones that saw the nights I cried behind boardroom doors, or the mornings I woke up doubting whether I deserved to keep fighting. But in the center of the room, I found the smallest mirror. Oval, cracked, silver faded to dull gray. It was my grandmother's, the only person who told me that worth wasn't proven in the will, but in the willpower. I stood in front of it for a long time, and then I spoke, not to the house, not to the dead, to myself. I am not their disappointment. I am not their cautionary tale. I am not the broken branch of this family tree. I breathed in deep. I am the fire that reset the soil. And just like that, something unlatched in my chest. Not vengeance, not rage, release. I didn't burn the room. That would have been too poetic, too expected. I left it intact, so anyone who entered next would have to see me in every reflection. Not just the girl I was, but the woman who survived it all. And walked away by choice. By the time the merger was announced, the Sloane name meant next to nothing in the business world. Years of ego-driven leadership under Julian had drained the brand of its dignity. The media had labeled him a legacy kid with a golden megaphone and a paper sword. Investors pulled out. Contracts failed. Whispers of bankruptcy replaced whispers of prestige. So when my new firm, under a name I hadn't yet publicly tied to myself, offered to acquire the Sloane Group, it was seen as mercy. It wasn't. It was judgment. The board, hollow-eyed and desperate, signed the papers at a round table that looked like a family funeral. Julian sat to the side, quiet, thinner, his cufflinks still polished, but his aura dim. He didn't speak a word, not even when I walked in. I didn't need to announce myself. The second I stepped into that conference room, the silence shifted. Eyes widened. Jaws set. I was the ghost of every decision they had justified. Every lie they had swallowed to keep their chairs. every dinner where my name was spoken like a curse. Now, I was their new boss, but I wasn't here for retribution. I was here to rewrite the contract between power and identity. After the papers were signed, and the last fountain pen was capped, I stood. This company was built by fear, I began. The fear of being less, of losing, of being seen without the mask. I looked directly at Julian. But I've learned something, I continued. Fear doesn't make empires, it rots them, and now that rot is being replaced, not with bloodline, but with backbone. I turned to the rest. You all played your part, and I'm not here to erase history. I'm here to outgrow it. With that, I slid a folder across the table. Inside was the restructuring plan. New leadership, merit-based appointments, a reinvestment in ethical startups and education funds, and a clause that removed the family entirely from the executive board. My final act of rebellion wasn't destruction, it was divestment. I didn't want the throne they tried to keep from me. I built my own. And it was carved from the ashes of every closed door, every silenced voice, every time I was told I didn't belong. As I walked out, Marina met me in the hallway. Her face was lit with something between awe and joy. Did it feel like revenge? She asked. I paused. No, I said. It felt like evolution. Because vengeance burns hot and fast. But evolution, it remakes the world, quietly, irreversibly. 6 months later, I found myself sitting in the exact same marble lobby where, years ago, they handed me my first tailored blazer and a clipboard full of expectations. But this time, I wasn't the heir. I was the architect. My new company, Veracore Holdings, didn't just acquire businesses, it restructured them. Ethics first, purpose second, profits a proud third. And we were growing faster than anyone predicted. People kept asking, why did you bother keeping the Sloan name attached to anything at all? Because it mattered that I didn't disappear. It mattered that the girl they erased was now writing the bylaws. But more than that, because I knew there was a new generation watching, girls like me, smart, strategic, too passionate to play quiet, too ambitious to smile politely through patriarchal rituals. So I launched the Vera Foundation, a non-profit offering scholarships to women in business, legal aid to whistleblowers, and mentorship programs for the kids whose families saw them as burdens, not builders. We hosted our first gala in the same ballroom that once held the Sloan anniversary dinners. The chandeliers sparkled like nothing had changed, but the faces were different. The speeches were raw. The power wasn't inherited, it was earned. And in the center of the ballroom, a single gold-framed portrait. Not of me, of every woman we'd funded that year. Dozens of headshots, collaged into one magnificent wall. Real people with real names. Not a single Sloan in the mix. But their success, that was my inheritance. And one more thing, I published a book. Legacy Isn't Blood, Building What They Said You Couldn't. It became a bestseller in under a week. Not because of scandal, but because people were hungry for truth, for a blueprint out of family traps, for stories that didn't begin with obedience and end with sacrifice. Julian was spotted once on a podcast, trying to explain what had happened. He said I was brilliant but cold. If refusing to burn myself for their version of love makes me cold, then yes, I am glacial. But I'm also standing, thriving, untouched by the flames that once danced too close. Beautiful. Let's bring this journey to its final crescendo, not with vengeance, not even with victory, but with clarity. This last chapter is a breath, a reckoning, a moment of silence that speaks louder than a boardroom full of suits. It was a clear autumn evening when I walked through the old Sloan estate for the last time. The property had been sold, of course, acquired quietly by a preservation society that promised to keep the grounds intact. I didn't want it bulldozed. I just didn't want it mine. But I needed one last look. Not for sentimentality, for confirmation. The halls, once filled with echoes of family banquets and whispered deals, now stood empty and chilled by disuse. The portraits on the walls, men in suits, women in pearls, seemed to stare at me like they'd lost the bet they never saw coming. I stood before the fireplace, where my father once told me I was too soft for power. And I smiled, because now I understood. The softness they condemned in me wasn't weakness, it was conscience, it was strategy. And it was the exact thing that had outlived all their bluster. I walked through each room, not to remember, but to release. The drawing room, where I was once lectured about loyalty. The dining hall, where I first saw Julian smirk as our grandfather raised his glass in his direction instead of mine. The study, where they gave me my first lesson in control, disguised as a promotion. I left nothing behind, not a single memory with weight. As I reached the front door, Marina texted me. Press just broke the news. Everyone knows now. You bought them out. Entirely. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because it wasn't about them anymore. Outside, the air was colder than expected. Sharp, alive. And for the first time in years, I realized. I didn't feel like a product of a legacy. I felt like its editor. No longer chained to a lineage, but authoring a lineage of my own. One built not on obedience, but defiance. Not on possession, but purpose. And as I walked down the gravel path, the estate behind me disappearing into dusk, I whispered to no one in particular. You should have left me nothing. I would have built this from ash anyway. Because the greatest revenge isn't being written into the will. It's writing your own damn story and signing it in permanent ink.